In 1750, a young Englishman named Thomas Thistlewood stepped off a ship in Jamaica and opened a notebook. He would keep writing for 37 years, nearly 14,000 pages. He recorded the weather, the price of rum, the letters he received, and in the same neat handwriting, on the same pages, he recorded the punishments he inflicted on the enslaved people who grew sugarcane. He wrote down human beings the way a shopkeeper writes down stock. That wasn't unusual. That was just accounting, because for 300 years, sugar was not simply a food. It was a system, one that weighed people, priced people, and entered people in ledgers next to barrels and nails. So here is the question this video is going to answer. How did a sweet-tasting grass become a machine that moved millions of human beings across an ocean? And what did the world really pay for the sweetness sitting in your kitchen right now? To find out, we have to go back 10,000 years, to an island where sugar was not white, not refined, and not for sale.
10,000 years ago, on the island of New Guinea, someone pulled a stalk of wild grass out of the ground and chewed it. That grass was sugarcane, and for thousands of years, that was the entire technology. Cut, chew, swallow. No crystals, no trade. Just farmers with sweet fiber between their teeth. The cane traveled slowly, canoe by canoe, through Southeast Asia and into India. And there, around 1,500 years ago, under the Gupta Empire, somebody worked out how to boil the juice down and cool it into something revolutionary, a solid. Crystals that Indian texts called kanda, a word that eventually walked all the way into English as the word candy, which you still use today. Think about that for a second. For most of human history, sweetness could not be stored, shipped, or sold. It rotted where it grew. The moment sugar became a crystal, it became money. Persian envoys met it and marveled at a reed that gave honey without bees. After the 7th century, Arab traders and engineers carried it west, with irrigation, refineries, and plantations in Egypt, Cyprus, and Spain. Wherever their empire spread, sugar mills followed. Europe, meanwhile, had no idea any of this existed. And here is the irony buried in sugar's first act. When it finally did reach the West, sugar was not a food at all. It was a drug. Apothecaries sold it by the ounce. Physicians prescribed it for fevers, for coughs, for weak chests. The substance we now blame for modern disease entered the Western world as medicine. Venetian cargo lists show it traveling beside pepper, silk, and pearls, a luxury for the very few. But a crystal that valuable raises an obvious question: who was going to grow it? The answer would redraw the map of the world. When Crusader knights reached the Holy Land at the end of the 11th century, they found fields of a strange reed and wrote home about a marvel they called sweet salt. Europe was hooked before it ever grew a single cane. For the next 500 years, sugar behaved like nothing you would recognize today. It was weighed out like treasure. In 1226, King Henry III of England wanted 3 pounds of it for a feast, and had to ask the mayor of Winchester whether that much could even be found in his city. 3 pounds, a king. By Tudor times, the rich were spending fortunes on sugar and wearing the evidence. In 1598, a German traveler named Paul Hentzner was granted an audience with Queen Elizabeth I. His journal records her pearls, her jewels, her red wig, and her black teeth. A defect, he wrote, the English seemed subject to from their great use of sugar. The Queen of England's teeth were rotting from sweetness, and her whole court knew it. Some accounts even claim that fashionable ladies darkened their teeth deliberately, so they too would look wealthy enough to afford decay. Rotten teeth as a status symbol. Scarcity does strange things to people. At this price, sugar was a display of raw power, sculpted into castles and eagles for royal banquets, locked away in chests like coin. Every merchant in Europe could read the arithmetic. Whoever grew this crystal at scale would own the richest trade on earth. In the 1420s, on a small Atlantic island called Madeira, Portugal began testing a model for doing exactly that. A model built on captive labor. The sweetest business in the world had just found its engine, and the engine ran on people. The model worked. That is the most chilling sentence in this story. On Madeira, planters cleared the forests, built mills, and forced enslaved workers to cut the cane. Output soared. Prices in Europe began to fall. Profit had found its formula. Stolen land plus stolen labor equals sweetness. In 1493, on his second voyage, Christopher Columbus carried sugarcane cuttings across the Atlantic. The cane loved the Caribbean climate. The business followed it. Brazil scaled the formula first. Then, in the 1640s, the small English island of Barbados converted almost overnight. Historians literally call it the Sugar Revolution. Within a single generation, forests became cane fields. Small farmers were bought out, and an entire island was rebuilt around one crop. By the end of that century, tiny Barbados was generating more wealth for England than its North American colonies combined, by most estimates. And the labor came from one place. Across the whole span of the Atlantic slave trade, roughly 12.5 million men, women, and children were forced onto ships on the African coast. Around 1.8 million of them died at sea. The majority of those who survived the crossing were sent to sugar, not cotton, not tobacco, sugar. It was the deadliest crop in the hemisphere. The cutting was relentless. The boiling houses ran through the night, and the rollers took hands and arms so often that many plantations kept a hatchet beside the machine. On many Caribbean estates, the commonly estimated life expectancy of a newly arrived worker was around 7 years. The planters knew it. Their own account books preserved the calculation. Plantation after plantation concluded it was cheaper to replace a worker than to keep one alive. Cheaper to replace. Understand that sentence, and you understand the entire system. This is where Thomas Thistlewood's notebook stops being a curiosity and becomes evidence. 37 years of pages, and their horror is precisely their calm. Sugar boiled, rain fell, a man was punished, nails were purchased, same ink, same page. The machine did not need monsters to run it. It needed bookkeepers. And Europe, stirring this new sweetness into its tea and coffee, mostly chose not to ask where it came from. The crystals arrived clean and white. The ledgers stayed on the far side of an ocean. Somebody was paying full price for every spoonful. It just wasn't the person holding the spoon. But ledgers have one weakness. They can be read. And the strangest part of this story, the part where a 2-penny pamphlet about English tea tables begins to crack the most profitable machine on earth, hasn't even started yet. The first cracks did not come from governments. They came from kitchens. In 1789, a man named Olaudah Equiano published the story of his own life. Kidnapped as a child in West Africa, sold between ships and islands, and finally, in 1766, permitted to buy his own body back for £40 sterling. He kept the receipt. A human being, purchasing himself out of the property column. His book became a bestseller across Britain, running through edition after edition while he toured the country reading from it. Suddenly, the ledgers had a voice, and the voice was telling England exactly what the sweetness cost. Then came the pamphlet. In 1791, a Quaker printer named William Fox published a short argument with a brutal piece of arithmetic at its center. By his reckoning, every few pounds of West Indian sugar consumed represented a portion of a human life. His pamphlet sold in the hundreds of thousands. By most estimates, the fastest-selling pamphlet England had ever seen. and it turned the tea table into a battlefield. Hundreds of thousands of British families, commonly estimated at 300,000 to 400,000, simply stopped buying slave-grown sugar. Grocers began advertising East India sugar as free produce. Wedgwood china carried the kneeling figure and the question, "Am I not a man and a brother?" Housewives who would never vote in their lives were running an economic weapon out of their pantries. Sugar built the system. Sugar's buyers began starving it. The planters laughed at first. They had Parliament, they had the banks, they had the Navy. What they did not have was an answer to a question spreading through 1 million households. What, exactly, is in this bowl? Abolitionists carried petitions with more signatures than England had ever gathered for any cause. The slave trade itself was outlawed in Britain in 1807, but the plantations kept running, the ledgers kept filling, and the men who kept them slept soundly. They believed the machine was too profitable to die. 3,000 miles away, on the richest sugar colony on Earth, the machine's own workforce was about to prove them wrong, not with pamphlets, but with fire. The French colony of Saint-Domingue, today's Haiti, was the crown jewel of the entire system. One small colony was producing roughly 40% of Europe's sugar, worked by around 500,000 enslaved people under some of the most lethal conditions in the hemisphere. It was, by most estimates, the single most profitable colony on the planet. August 1791. The enslaved people of the northern plain rose up, and the cane fields that had burned their lives away began burning in the literal sense, plantation after plantation, until the night sky over the coast glowed. Out of that uprising rose a formerly enslaved coachman named Toussaint Louverture, who outgeneraled the French, the Spanish, and the British in turn. Napoleon sent tens of thousands of soldiers to take the colony back. They failed. And in 1804, Haiti declared itself the first nation in history founded by formerly enslaved people who had defeated their enslavers. The richest sugar machine on Earth had been dismantled by the very people it was built to consume. Think about that for a second. Then came the punishment. Because this story never lets a victory stand clean, and the pattern you are about to see repeats twice more before this video ends. In 1825, French warships appeared off the Haitian coast and demanded payment, 150 million francs, as compensation to the former slaveholders for their lost property. The property was the Haitian people themselves. Haiti paid and kept paying, borrowing from French banks to service the debt for well over a century. The victims financed their enslavers' retirement. Britain ran the same logic in reverse. When it finally abolished slavery in its empire in 1833, Parliament paid out £20 million, a sum so large it was commonly estimated at 40% of the national budget in compensation. Every penny of it went to the slave owners. The freed received nothing. British taxpayers only finished paying off the loan behind that compensation in 2015. If you paid tax in Britain before that year, some of your money was still settling sugar's oldest bill. Meanwhile, Napoleon, cut off from Caribbean sugar by war and blockade, ordered his scientists to find a substitute, and they found it in a humble root, the sugar beet. By the 1850s, Europe was growing its own sweetness in its own fields. The island monopoly was broken. Sugar was about to stop being precious at all. And that created an entirely new kind of problem, because once sugar became cheap, it went everywhere. Here is the whole modern era in one line of arithmetic. The average English person ate roughly 4 pounds of sugar a year in 1700, around 18 pounds by 1800, and past 90 pounds by 1900. From royal luxury to working-class staple in 2 centuries flat. Sugar poured into jam, into biscuits, into condensed milk and sweet tea. The cheap, fast calories that fueled factory shifts through the Industrial Revolution. A mill worker's lunch was often bread, jam, and sugared tea, the fuel of empire, priced for pennies. The crystal that once signed royal banquets now kept the assembly lines moving. The 20th century industrialized the appetite itself. Soda fountains, candy bars, breakfast cereals, and eventually high-fructose corn syrup, a sweetener so cheap it made sense to add it to things that were never sweet. Bread, sauces, dressings, soup. Sweetness stopped being a choice you made and became a default you had to opt out of. The average American today consumes roughly 17 teaspoons of added sugar a day, nearly triple the recommended limit. And when scientists began asking whether all this sugar was harming the human heart, the industry answered the way industries do. In 1965, the Sugar Research Foundation quietly paid 3 Harvard scientists, the money arriving through the Harvard mailrooms of 1965, roughly $6,500, worth about $50,000 today, to publish a review steering the blame for heart disease away from sugar and onto fat. The payments were not disclosed. The review shaped nutrition policy for a generation. The scheme only came fully to light in 2016, when researchers published the industry's own internal documents. The scientists who refused to play along paid for it. A British professor named John Yudkin warned in 1972, in a book called Pure, White and Deadly, that sugar, not fat, was the greater danger. The industry worked to marginalize him. Conferences dropped him, and he died largely dismissed. Decades later, the science swung his way. The pattern here should feel familiar by now. The product stays sweet, the cost gets moved onto somebody else, and the ledger recording it stays out of sight. 3 centuries ago, the hidden cost was carried in ships. Today, it is carried in bloodstreams. Which brings us, at last, back to a notebook in Jamaica, and to what sugar left carved into the world you live in right now. Look at a map of the Caribbean, and you are looking at sugar's handwriting. Whole islands whose forests were cleared for cane, whose populations descend overwhelmingly from people brought there against their will, whose port cities were laid out to load one product. Look at Britain, the docks of Liverpool and Bristol, the country houses of the sugar barons, banks and insurance firms whose early ledgers are thick with plantation business. Some of those institutions are still trading today, and in recent years, several have opened their archives and issued formal apologies for what the pages contain. Museums now label the sugar money behind their own collections. The past did not disappear. It incorporated. Language kept the receipts too. Every time you say candy, you are speaking a Sanskrit word that crossed Persia and Arabia inside a merchant's crate. Every time someone calls easy money a sugar daddy's gift, or a softened blow sugar-coated, you are hearing the old equation. Sweetness as wealth, sweetness as disguise, still running underneath English. Grocery shelves keep it plainest of all. The white crystals in the paper bag remain among the cheapest items in the entire store, cheaper per pound than almost any other food humans produce. 4 centuries of engineering went into making the most labor-soaked crop in history feel weightless. Governments are now fighting sugar the way they once fought for it. Mexico taxed sugary drinks in 2014. The United Kingdom followed with a levy on soft drinks. Dozens of countries have joined since. Health ministries publish limits, schools ban vending machines, and the World Health Organization commonly recommends keeping added sugar below about 6 teaspoons a day for adults. The empire's product is now the public enemy, pursued by the same kind of pamphlets, campaigns, and kitchen table arithmetic that once pursued its trade. William Fox counted lives per pound. Modern health campaigns count teaspoons per can. Different century. Same method. Make the invisible cost visible and let the buyers decide. So let's go back to Jamaica, back to 1750, and the young Englishman stepping off the ship with a blank notebook under his arm. Thomas Thistlewood wrote for 37 years. When historians finally read those nearly 14,000 pages, they found no monster raging in the margins. They found something worse. Routine. Sugar boiled. Rain fell. People were priced, punished, and recorded in the same steady hand that noted the cost of nails. He was not hiding anything, because in his world there was nothing to hide. The system had made cruelty clerical. Now stand in your own kitchen, somewhere within reach of you right now, in the sugar bowl, the biscuit tin, the sauce bottle, the cereal box, is the exact substance those pages were really about. It arrives clean, white, and weightless, the way it always did for the people far from the fields. You did nothing wrong by owning it. Neither did the Georgian housewife stirring her tea. That was always the genius of the machine. It kept the sweetness and the suffering on opposite sides of an ocean, and it let the distance do the forgetting. But you are not the Georgian housewife anymore. You have seen the pages. You know that a king once begged a city for 3 pounds of it. You know a queen's smile turned black from it. You know that 12.5 million people were entered into ledgers because of it. And you know that some of those ledgers were still being paid off, in Paris and in London, within living memory. The 4 pounds a year world and the 17 teaspoons a day world are the same world, only the bookkeeping moved. Sweetness was never the dangerous part. The trade was, the accounting was, and every generation, someone has had to open the books, read what was really written there, and decide what they were willing to keep paying. The abolitionists did it with a pamphlet. The Haitians did it with fire. The scientists did it with data, and were buried for it, and were proven right. Somebody always paid full price. The only question history keeps asking is whether the person enjoying the sweetness ever finds out who. Those ledgers are still out there. Thistlewood's pages sit in an archive in Connecticut, available to anyone who requests them. The compensation records sit in London, searchable by name. The industry's internal memos sit in university libraries, published for the world in 2016. None of this is hidden anymore. It is simply waiting to be read. Sugar's history may already be written. Its account is still open. The next spoonful is yours. Weigh it